I said, I don't know how I'm supposed to not care about these folks, but there was a little bit of that like hard justice, hard on crime mentality that growing up Southern. I knew people that literally got away with so many bad things that I was like, if somebody's done something bad, they should pay for it. And then that was when I was really convicted around my own faith that I know I had messed up so many times. I had messed up terribly. I had hurt people, and I let my own personal demons get in the way of seeing redemption and grace that Jesus offered me. And so I go, hold on, like there are people in prison that I need to know what's going on. And that's when I started meeting with amazing people, like some of the pastors down in Mississippi and some of the folks who work in the space of criminal justice.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
All right, I appreciate you joining us for another episode of American Potential. Thanks for being with us. So, think about growing up in the shadow of some of our country's darkest history, which molded our guest today to have a heart to help others. He grew up in a small town in the heart of Mississippi that made national headlines back in the 1960s because 3 civil rights workers were kidnapped and killed by the Ku Klux Klan and others. Because his mom grew up during this time, she taught him that every life is valuable, no matter what they believe or how they look. And at a young age, he took those values and started working with the homeless. And he learned that sitting down and talking to someone over a meal is the best way to make a connection to learn how to help. Knowing he wanted to make a career out of helping others, he went to college and he graduated with a degree. But he figured out he could accomplish more working in a totally different field. I want to welcome Cade Yates, who is Mississippi's Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Cade, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So let's talk about that. I think to many people who didn't grow up in the South and didn't grow up, under, segregation or closely after segregation, people don't understand what that's like. Talk about what life was like growing up in Mississippi.
Yeah. So I think the craziest part is when I was growing up, life was very normal for my earlier fundamental years of, I wasn't exposed to the history in the past.
Uh-huh.
I had an interest in history, but I didn't look into it. I had a very fundamental Southern upbringing. I had fried chicken and catfish and greens and mashed potatoes at all the meals. I had a grandmother and a grandfather who had me in church constantly. My mom constantly, telling me, "Hey, let's go." And my mom and my dad early on would take me fishing, and we would go out there and get ant bites down by the river and down at the ponds. And so, I had so many quintessential Southern memories of growing up listening to Southern gospel and listening to country music and honestly, having a dog named General Lee. That is the Southern thing is you
Sure.
have these very Southern things. And unfortunately for me, that earlier time, I had no idea what was going on under the surface. It was very just right on top of just, I loved where I was. I knew God had blessed me with an amazing place to live. And I had amazing family who, my grandfather was a carpenter. I worked in his carpentry shop times. My grandmother worked at Walmart. I would go to, work with your grandmother, day at work. And I would, my mom, she had all these crazy jobs, repo and all these other fun things.
Wow.
And eventually she got an insurance. But the thing is like, I just had a very maybe naive idea of what Southern living was. And that was until, I think when it really hit me was I was in school and they started talking to us about, the history of Mississippi. And there were some people who'd shied away from what happened, but I had a lot of people because what people don't understand about growing up in Mississippi, we have a 40% minority population. I grew up heavily getting to know people from the Choctaw tribe that my family's land is right off the reservation. I grew up with grandparents who employed a lot of folks. I mean, my great grandfather was a grave digger. So like he was really getting folks from across the spectrum, and, going into school with folks, black and white, I got to know so many people from so many different sides that was until one day that somebody said something about, well, I can't remember what it was, but it just hit me one day. Something happened and I have to know what happened. And so as a young child, I started understanding and researching what happened in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And
how old were you when you started?
Probably 8 or 9. I mean, I knew something was off. And about this time and I'll just go right into it. I have a family member who is part of the Ku Klux Klan and is someone that was maybe not directly involved with these civil rights murders, but there was a Pastor Edgar Ray Killen who was brought up on charges in his part of these murders. And I saw this family member pushing Edgar Ray Killen out of the courthouse and taking care of this pastor that was involved in these murders. And I go, what? I sat in front of this person in church for years.
This was a family member?
This was a family member.
Yeah.
And I go, what is he doing with this guy that's being accused and was, I believe he spent the rest of his life in jail for murder, his part in this act of terrorism and violence. And I was so confused. And I would think back and I would listen to my mom as she would talk about, I would go back and I would listen to her talk about how deeply important people were and not to judge people by the color of their skin.
Sure.
And that was when kind of the scales fell from my eyes and I go, holy cow, there's something deeper here. Because I grew up with an uncle who was African-American. I grew up with family members that on the surface, everything seemed fine. But that was when everything kind of fell apart, when I saw this family member, assisting and I heard family members talk about, he's part of this. He's definitely part of this whole movement that held people down. And then I think the climax of all that was this family member refused to come to his own mother's funeral because my uncle who was black, JJ, was there. And holy cow, that was the moment I said, I've got to understand this more. And so my mom would sit me down and she would talk to me about, as I was growing up and continue to grow up, it was such an important thing to her for me to know that, number one, every child, man, woman is created in the image of God, and that person has such value. And it doesn't matter what the color of their skin are; they're no different than us. We sit down, we have meals, we have conversations, we experience the same troubles and tragedies in Mississippi. And at the end of the day, the crazy part is growing up in Mississippi, you just have so many opportunities to sit down and talk about things, talk about the problems that we've experienced in the past, the tragedy that our state's experienced. And I think a lot of times it's made us better, the fact that we can have these conversations. So hopefully that kind of gives you a place.
Yeah, it does. And one of the it is unique to America. The slave trade, for instance, it was not unique to America. It was a worldwide slave trade. But what is unique about America is that America, along with Britain, led the way in eliminating the slave trade and working to eliminate it, because our founding fathers, despite how they sometimes are vilified by some, they believed deeply that they were religious, they believed in God, and they believed that the rights that we had came from God, not based on our color, but based on us being human beings.
Exactly.
And so while it's a tragic story of certainly of slavery in America and certainly in the South. It's a stain, and it's a legacy that we always will live with. But the beauty of it too, at the end of the day, is that it was America and it was Britain that led the world in eliminating the slave trade. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's when I went to college later, I had this girl and me have this conversation, a friend of mine, young black girl who lived near the university. And I said, and she told me, Mississippi's no better than it was, 60 years ago. No, I know you've experienced this, and I know that our experience can't be this far apart,
right?
Because I know what happened. I know I can go in Mississippi. There's the two museums, and one side is Civil Rights Museum, and they have columns of the people that were murdered in these times. And I go, we're not there's definitely times where bad things happen and terrible, horrendous things happen because people do base things off of race. But it's come so far, and we've come to a place where I sit down with legislators, no matter who they are, and I'm able to have a conversation with them directly and say, I care about your constituents, not your black constituents or your white constituents. I care about your constituents, and I want to help them improve their lives. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just feel like we as Mississippians and as a nation have really taken up the call and said, I am willing to put myself out there, have conversations, and make sure that we never get to the point where I can't look at someone of a different race and say, we're not that far apart. We have had different experiences. There are cultural differences that we can acknowledge. There's things that I will never understand about growing up black or Hispanic or Native American. But there are times that we can sit down and we can talk about me being in a single parent home. I love my father and I love my mother, but they just weren't right for each other. And so I'm able to sit down and have a conversation about that. I'm able to have a conversation about growing up in a single wide trailer in, Mississippi, and going to school every day with recycled shoes because my mom just had to work really hard to just put food on the table, not give me exactly what I wanted. And I had a great life, but at the end of the day, there was a lot of experiences that I can sit down and talk about. I love music, and that's the one thing that I want people to come away from when they hear about Mississippi and when they hear this podcast, is that most people just think Mississippi is in last place in everything. We're this, we're that. We're, I am a big guy, so we do like to eat, so we are a little heavy. But at the end of the day, we are storytellers. We are deeply ingrained with music and art and acting and all these ways of telling and conveying stories. And I hope that that's what people see when they see Mississippi, is that they're able to come and experience Mississippi and experience a little slice of what I experienced growing up, of just being able to sit down and have a conversation and say, yes, we both grew up in a very different way in some ways, but also there's a lot of things that overlap of our experiences.
It seems that you obviously it comes to your upbringing, right? And the values that are instilled in you. It sounds like you were brought up with faith, right?
Yes.
With Christian faith.
Yep.
But also just doing the right thing, treating people fairly, treating people decently, those sorts of things. And not everybody gets that. So, right,
No.
you were very blessed, right, to have that growing up. When you were a teenager, you started a homeless ministry. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I didn't start it, but there was a local church who my mom was familiar with. We had kind of moved to the area, and we were looking for opportunities to serve. And my mom.
What made you want to look for opportunities to serve? Because there's a lot of people who wouldn't not say that. How old were you then?
I was probably 12, 13.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of 12-year-olds look for opportunities to serve. So what made you want to serve?
So I think to start, I had to step back a little bit and say it goes back to my mom and her activism and her ministry with moms that come from like teen pregnancies. My grandmother gave birth to my mom at 13 years old. And my mom was very open about her work in that area because, my mom was a product of rape. And so she just has this passion for all for all babies and for all women in these situations. And so that continued on. She worked with these single moms, and then these single moms would lead to people in poverty. And she would see the communities that were around this. And so the place we were living at the time is right outside of the city of Jackson, about 30 minutes. And the city was it was in such a tragic place. There were so many homeless. You would drive into the city and there were so many deaths that were happening. And at the end of the day, we, sitting in our church, we heard the call to go forth and to serve people and to go to the least of these and to really pay attention to the people on the side of the road that that a lot of people just, I guess, lay to the side and say, I can't help them. Mm-hmm. And there are some people that will never be able to be helped because there are some people that have chosen that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. But when we went down to Jackson, we found a lot of people who just legitimately needed not some big government approach, not some heavy-handed approach, not I'm going to tell you how to fix your life. They needed someone to listen to them. And I found so many incredible people who had wonderful stories of the way they got there was not, some of it was their own fault, and they would admit that. And some of them were the economic troubles that led them there were not of their own doing. I mean, some of them just grew up in very broken homes. And I mean, I identify with that a lot because, like I said, I mean, growing up in a single parent home, I understand that one bad economic decision can really turn out very badly for an individual. Mm-hmm. And so we found a church that was doing homeless ministry. They would take a bus down there and they would hand out food and they would have all these opportunities to serve. And we fell in love with it. And we did it for years. And I really am thankful for that moment because we got to meet some really incredible individuals that we were able to help.
Yeah. That sense of wanting to help people comes from your faith.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially where it comes from.
Yes. Yeah? Jesus is very intentional when it comes to, I hate talking about this sometimes because people have taken the words of Jesus and made it so political. And I know I work for an organization that works in the policy space. Mm-hmm. But the reason I care about this and the reason that I try to keep those words intentional is because I want to do it myself. Mm-hmm. I believe that Jesus has called me to individually go find people and find out what they're struggling with, find out what they're dealing with, and see how I can help them. And again, some people, it's just a meal. It's just a new pair of shoes. It's just a piece of clothing. And then for some people, it's they need a license to go do something to get a job, or they need something much bigger happen. And so that's where it all comes from. Jesus says to serve the least of these. And in my faith and growing up, I know Jesus has given me so many opportunities when I failed and when I've messed up and when I have not loved myself. And that was a lot of the time that I really hated going down there because I knew there were so many people that just couldn't look themselves in the mirror and love who they were. And I hoped I could share with them just a little part of that, even though I fully at that time didn't understand even how to love myself. But now looking back, I just really wanted people to love themselves, and I wanted them to find a way to just get to a place where they were comfortable and in a place where they can provide the basic necessities and then move up from there. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. No, it does. Talk about maybe a couple of the people that you were able to help through that ministry.
Yeah. So one guy was named Ron. Ron was a short guy, little Hulk Hogan mustache. He lived in a jitney jungle. Most people don't know that unless you're from the South, but a jitney jungle is an old grocery store. And this might've been a warehouse, but the old jitney jungle warehouse. And he lived in the upstairs area with a few other guys that were, just sleeping in the garbage filled rooms, just trying to survive. And we started talking to Ron and getting to know Ron. And he said, I've got family And we said, okay, well, let's talk to your family. Let's like, what can we do to help you? And we took a very individualized approach, and eventually me and Ron got to the point where I went with him to where he lived in the Jitney Jungle warehouse, and I got his stuff with him. My mom was so scared for me because as a 15, 16-year-old boy,
yeah,
walking into a place where drug needles and broken glass and all this trash is piled up, to make sure that we get this man out. And we found him a camper, and he lived in that camper. And unfortunately, we've lost touch. But I mean, it's a very transient lifestyle a lot of times. But I know that up until at least a few years ago, he was still living in the camper. He had a roof over his head. He had shelter. He was working odd jobs to at least get him into a place where he could have a more sustainable life than, in the throes of, if it got below freezing or if it's torrential downpours or whatever it was. And so I was really proud about, helping him. And then next guy, Dave. Dave was Ron's drinking buddy, and he would never change. He said, I would never change. And every day I go down there and I'd be like, Dave, I love you, and I want to help you. And I'd, we'd bring him food and we'd have conversations with him. And unfortunately, Dave, it took until he actually found a lump on his breast and said, oh my goodness, I might have cancer. And so a member of the church that was there took him in and got him to a doctor and made sure he had what he needed. And it turned out it wasn't that, but it was enough of a wake up call that he said, I need help. I want to get out of here. And that's when we connected we found his sister in Birmingham, and eventually after some working and things, he went to live with his sister in Birmingham, and he started cutting grass for money, and his sister was very good with him. And up until his funeral, I guess that was probably 7 years ago now. I mean, he lived a very comfortable life, and it was just one of those things where, I mean, we're Mississippi State fans. I know that's, I know this might be taking a wild turn, but it was to the point where he requested us to specifically wear Alabama gear to his funeral, because he said, I'm going to get y'all an Alabama gear one day, even if it's my funeral. And so that was it. And so, those were just a few stories. I mean, there's so many other people that I was able to have a connection with. That, I mean, there was an artist downtown who probably has tons of money in the bank, because every time he sells a new painting, half of it goes in here and the other half goes into an account where he can use it. But he lives his life a certain way. And there were so many other stories of people, but just to get back, I had so many experiences in that time where I just knew that there were so many ways to serve people. And that led to, like, when I graduated high school, I actually did my senior project with a group in Jackson named We Will Go, who was an amazing Christian organization that this family from Brandon, because Jesus called them to it, just like when he called us to do this homeless ministry, they left their comfortable lifestyle to move and set up multiple houses. And they I think they run the YMCA now. I mean, they are such an impactful group because the faith that I think not just Mississippians, but Christians in general, if you really dive deep, it's such an incredible part to serve people. And I've had to, over the past few years, I've had to look back and go, I'm not doing that as much as I used to, but I am serving people in new ways. And I am still finding ways of serving people in those homeless, in the homeless community, even when I can't do it the same way I used to.
Yeah. Amazing that you were doing that at, the age of 15, and that's incredible. After high school, you decided you wanted to continue helping people, right? So what'd you go to college to get your degree in? Yeah.
So I went to William Carey University for a degree in history and religion. I wanted to be a pastor. I had this deep calling to serve people. And in the South, the people who serve people are, there's good organizations, there's nonprofits, there's all, but the ultimate pinnacle is a pastor. And I really felt the calling to take that time of understanding the racial tension that I understood as a young man, and taking the opportunities I learned with homeless ministry and trying to combine those into the ability to pastor a flock or a congregation in the ways of going out and serving people. And I love William Carey. It was a great place. But unfortunately, when I got there, I found that it was much deeper than just becoming a pastor. I found that the walls of the church were constraining. And it wasn't, I don't want to blame the church at all for that, but it was definitely in myself. I found that the church was maybe not the right fit for me as standing in a pulpit and speaking on these things Sunday after Sunday. And I went there for 4 years, and I had a wonderful experience getting to know people, getting to know new opportunities. I joined, some political groups to understand my I knew there was a bigger piece to how some of the problems were. Where did the problems start? And I said, where did the problems start? Okay, yes, part of it is sin. Part of it is our natural tendency to lean into sin. But I was like, there's more to this than that. Oh, some of it's government. Some of it is like, holy cow, a lot of it's government. And that was where I really started to say, man, there's a lot more to do here than just working within the four walls of a church. So that's where I started. Now, there's a lot more to that story, and I'd love to dive in. Yeah.
Well, and as you started doing this, you began to interact with like the policy arena.
Yes.
So tell us about that. How'd you get involved in policy?
Yeah. So the first area was working with a college campus group that was working on more libertarian policies. And I go, man, I can get behind some of these things. Some of it was like gun related, and growing up Southern, guns are a big part.
Sure.
Some of it was alcohol policy. And, even for me, I was not, it wasn't my forte. It wasn't the biggest area, but I was like, okay, like there's some things that just don't make sense around this. And then slowly, I worked full time through college. So, every time I got my paycheck, I'd be like, man, they're taking a lot of money out. And so these guys would slowly start talking to me about how government interacted with that. And that was the first step. And then the second step was when I sold guns, I actually went to work at a big box store, and Mississippi was changing some of their laws around how to carry a firearm. And that's probably my biggest area that I still keep as one of my more passionate areas is firearms policy.
Yeah.
And so I had people come up to me, didn't matter who they were. I would want an individualized customer experience where I looked at them and I said, all right, you're going to buy a gun. How are you going to legally carry it? Because I don't want you to go to jail, and I don't want the state to harm you for doing something wrong that, you just didn't know about. So I actually had to look up the law and look up what Mississippi's laws were and give it to them and say, this is the law. You can conceal carry in a bag or in a briefcase right now. Then later we got constitutional carry, and later we got this, and later we got, and so there were times the laws would change. And I think that was the first time that I actually interacted with policy one-on-one.
Yeah. So you then kind of figured out being a pastor maybe wasn't the way that you wanted to have the best impact in life. So what'd you do?
Yeah. So honestly, I didn't know what to do. I had almost no direction, and I don't want to dive deep down this rabbit trail too much, but that was also a dark time for me. Like I had lost my sense of direction when it came to what I wanted to do. I had not know about AFP at that point. I didn't know the organization I was working with would want you to go door knock in the summer. And there's nothing wrong with door knocking. It's great. It's great for some things, but but I was like, there's got to be more that I can do on top of it. It was just getting people elected, and I was like, I can't do that. And so I was in a really dark place where I just didn't really know what to do. And this led me down a really unfortunate dark path of, like I said before, around loving yourself. I didn't know how to love myself. I didn't know how to interact with myself. And so I really didn't know what to do. And it wasn't until a friend of mine recommended me for AFP way after I graduated high school and was just working in this big box store, that I said, okay, I'll give it a try and see what I can find.
Yeah. Talk about, I guess, the intersection between your faith and what you do for AFP. How do those two things intersect?
Yeah. So when I first started AFP, I walked in the door on my interview and I met two wonderful guys that are no longer with the organization. They've gone to do amazing things. But both of them were very Christian men. And both of them had their ideas around why they did what they did. Their why was because God had called them to serve the family, serve the state of Mississippi, to make sure that every individual had the best life that they could possibly attain while staying within the boundaries of the Bible. And so that was where I first understood that there might be a way to talk about my faith and talk about what we're doing at AFP. And this first presented itself with criminal justice. When we first started working on criminal justice, I said, I don't know how I'm supposed to not care about these folks, but there was a little bit of that like hard justice, hard on crime mentality of growing up Southern. I knew people that literally got away with so many bad things that I was like, if somebody's done something bad, they should pay for it. And then that was when I was really convicted around my own faith that I know I had messed up so many times. I had messed up terribly. I had hurt people, and I let my own personal demons get in the way of seeing redemption and grace that Jesus offered me. And so I go, hold on, there are people in prison that I need to know what's going on. And that's when I started meeting with amazing people, like some of the pastors down in Mississippi and some of the folks who work in the space of criminal justice. And these are people, some of them are formerly incarcerated, some of them aren't. And I just started listening to stories of people that said, I messed up, but I got sent away for a very long time. And I said, okay, we need to talk about, I went back to my faith and I went back to the Bible, and I saw, the use of prison in the Bible, and there is punishment for wrongdoing, but there's also grace and there's also mercy. And I found that there was a lot of times that my work at AFP there was a lot of people who screwed up and deserved a second chance, just like I was given. And that was probably where it first started. And so we worked on a lot of stuff around drug policy and addiction recovery, and some work around, like, once somebody's been in jail for a very long time, is the time proportionate to the crime? And are we able to actually have a conversation about maybe this person deserves an opportunity to go back to their family, be a father again, be a mother again, be someone that is working in their communities and contributing and taking that life experience and going back to their community and saying, kids in my community, don't do what I did. Or, hey, what are the problems that are causing some of the, folks to do incredibly harmful things? No matter if it's from drug use or from, living in poverty and not understanding the magnitude and level of some of the actions they were taking. So I think that's where everything started.
Right. How about some of the issues that you're working on through Americans for Prosperity now?
Yeah.
What about some of the issues you're working on?
Yeah. So the first one is certificate of need.
Yeah.
Something that I didn't mention about my mom is my mom had multiple sclerosis. And I remember her coming in the room and tears in her eyes telling me and my baby sister, you know, I have this condition, and it's going to be very expensive. It's going to be very tough. We've got some really hard road ahead of us. And luckily she's hit the plateau, because it's either with multiple sclerosis, you're in a wheelchair by a certain point in your life, or you hit a plateau and you can live a relatively normal life with medications. And when I came to AFP, I was like, I don't know how to help my family. I don't know how to help these people that are in my church that are struggling with cancer, with, diabetes and mental health disorders. And that was when my boss at the time looked at me and Forrest Thigpen, who worked with us at that time, goes, well, we need to look into certificate of need laws. Certificate of need laws are literally, if someone wants to come into the state and spend any of their own money on services, they're not allowed to unless they go through a government process that is not based off of their quality, but is based off of what is, what their competition says about them. And me as a Christian, I said, if someone wants to come and help, because a lot of people now look at the medical side and go, oh, it's just about money. It's just about insurance, just about this or that. No, there's a part of people that they definitely want to have an impact on people. And I'm not called to be a doctor, but there are people who God has laid his hands on and said, you will be a doctor, or you will be a nurse. You will be someone that helps people in the sicknesses and ailments that are plaguing my people. And I think that was where I was able to connect my faith with the problems and the solutions, and into a way of going. I talk to legislators every day about this year we have a bill on the table, and I don't know, whenever this airs, it might be passed, it might die, right? But it's on mental health and substance abuse and birthing centers. And all of those areas have a deep impact when it comes to my family and my faith and myself. And so I connected all those things with my faith and my family. And I sat down with folks and I talked to people. I said, what is your number one complaint right now? They said, oh, my healthcare is terrible. Okay, I want to talk to you about maybe there's a way to fix this. Yeah. So that I'm a healthcare guy. That's what I really enjoy the most. There's education, which is a big part of our work, and growing up again in a poverty, in poverty in some places, and moving constantly, and with my mom, trying to get us to the best school possible. Education reform becomes a big part. ESAs and the zip codes matter to what area you're in. My mom just wanted me to get the best education possible. So I really connect everything together in that. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you joining us and telling us your story. It's fascinating. That's what I love about this podcast is it's just ordinary, everyday folks who are breaking barriers and you growing up where you did and using your faith to kind of overcome the history, the dark history that was in your community growing up and then in the South generally. But I appreciate you coming and sharing your story, Cade.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. And if you can indulge me, one last thing. Yeah. I have to say how thankful I am for this organization, for AFP. It got me into a place where I was able to work on myself, and I was able to face some of the demons that I had in my life. And I was able to get married and to have a family and to buy a house and to be in a place where my mission every single day is to make Mississippi the best place to live, work, and raise a family. And I'm so excited to be able to work on that with AFP and have this as an opportunity to serve in a new way, in a way that 10-year-old, 11-year-old me would have never dreamed, sitting down with legislators, sitting down with individuals over that meal and over that conversation and saying, this is what I struggle with. This is what my family struggle with. This is what our community struggles with. How can you help? I want to give you an opportunity to work through this. And I'm just thankful to have that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Cade. Appreciate you. Yeah, you bet. Cade's story is a great one, right? It's a story of a young man with a lot of values instilled in his life from a very young age. Someone who went out at the age of 15 and was doing a street ministry for homeless people. But it talks about how his story speaks really to the value of going out and living a life of meaning and wanting to do something with your life. And Cade's a great example of being able to take, adversity that happened in his life and really molding his life and shaping it so that he can help others. And that's just an amazing story. So we're glad to bring it to you. Remember, go out, defend liberty, defend freedom. They're easily taken for granted. Do not take liberty and freedom for granted. Please go out, defend liberty and freedom with all your heart, with all your soul. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.